wasting time, straight to one of the reasons, many reasons why we are here. Olive, are you ready?
Kale, I was born ready.
Olive, do your things.
Before I introduce our keynote speaker, it's important to mention that this section has to be as interactive as possible, so we want you to please ask questions. But permit me to read a brief bio. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie She's a Nigerian author from Enugu State with a global influence. She has a master's degree in African Studies from Yale University and a master's degree in creative writing from Johns Hopkins University. She was awarded a Harder Fellowship at Princeton University for the 2005 to 2006 academic year, and a fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute of Harvard University for the 2011-2012 academic year. In 2008, she received a MacArthur Fellowship, popularly known as Genius Grant. She has received honorary degrees, doctorate degrees, I must add, from Eastern Connecticut State University, Johns Hopkins University, her alma mater, Williams College, the University of Edinburgh. I could go on and on. So maybe I should ask if it's safe to say Dr. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Her work has been translated into over 30 languages. She has delivered 2 landmark TED Talks, her 2009 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and her 2012 TED Talk, We Should All Be Feminists, which started a worldwide conversation about feminism, was published as a book in 2014. Her most recent work, Notes on Grief, an essay about losing her father, was published in 2021. She was named one of Times Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world in 2015. And in 2017, Fortune magazine named her one of the world's 50 greatest leaders. She's a member of both the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Now, we all know how very passionate she is about her roots. So permit me to introduce to you and to welcome to the stage Professor James Nwoye Adichie, Grace Ifoma Adichie, Oyirinea Omekanaya, Gemekalinenanaya, Adobodo Dike, the one, the only, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Thank you. That has to be the best introduction I've ever had. It is by far. And it also makes me a bit emotional. I think one of the things that I'm learning in the aftermath of losing my parents in quick succession is that grief is not really what happens when you're sad. Often it's what happens when you're happy. And so I've noticed that when the happy things happen to me, when I'm doing things I'm excited by, there's just that sense of, nobody to FaceTime and tell them how it went. So thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm really happy to be here. I've heard such good things about WIMBIZ, and I also want to start by just telling you that I sound a bit croaky because I don't feel very well. I've been traveling, I'm exhausted, and the thing that worried me the most was I'm speaking at WIMBIZ. Nigerian women do not play. So I was like, how is it that this is the day that I'm just not my best? So I know that the theme is firing forward. And so the way that I interpret it is, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? And so I thought that what I would do today is tell you my own story, because one of the things I've loved about reading about WIMBIZ is that it's really very much about storytelling, where people come and tell their own stories. And I am passionate about storytelling. So I thought I would tell you my own personal story, and then hopefully that we could have a bit of what here we call an interactive session. So I want to start by, I'll start right at the beginning of my story, which is, so I was born in 1977. I'm the fifth of 6 children. My father was a professor. My mother worked at the university as well, Nsukka campus, the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. And, and then Nsukka people here. Yay! And so I'm actually from Anambra State, but I grew up in Nsukka, which is in Enugu State. So both, I kind of feel like I'm from 2 states, Anambra and Enugu. And so my mother told me the story of how she I came a bit early, apparently. I think I came maybe 2 weeks early. So my mother had gone to her last checkup before the baby was due. And my father drove her from Nsukka to Enugu. Enugu is where the teaching hospital was, so about an hour's drive. And it was supposed to be her final checkup, but then she started to get contractions. And so they said to her, oh, you can't leave, you have to stay. And the labor ward was full. So my mother's brother, my uncle, who's now a cardiologist at University of Calabar, at the time was training to be a doctor. So he was a resident at UNTH in Enugu. So he said, I'm going to find a bed for you. So finally he found a bed for my mother in the ophthalmology ward. So there she was with her big belly while everybody else had eye problem. But so she went there and she said she knew the baby was going to come in a matter of hours. But my mother was most interested, she said, in the jollof rice that they were sharing among the patients. My mother adored rice. My mother was like a rice fanatic. So she said the jollof rice smelled so good. And most of all, she said that they did not give the people in the labor ward jollof rice. So she was happy that she was in the ophthalmology ward. And so this woman who was contracting says to the nurses, "Dobe palonum jollof rice nkem. Keep my own jollof rice for me." And she goes into the theater, pushes out the baby in like 30 minutes, that incredible woman. And the next thing she does is go back and say to them, "Where is my jollof rice?" So, and the first time my mother told me this story, I remember thinking, but where was your baby as you were going to struggle for as you went to struggle for jollof rice? Where was your baby? She said that they took me to the labor ward, right? So that after she ate her jollof rice, she then went to see her baby. And she said 2 things. She said she always wanted a girl, and she wanted a girl with hair. And she was happy that she got both. So at least it kind of made up for her jollof rice obsession. I had a very happy childhood. I had the loveliest parents. And growing up in Nsukka for me was just really almost like a gift to grow up on that campus that felt safe, where you kind of knew everyone else, because it was us children of staff, so you knew everybody's parents, you went to the same primary school, and most of all, there was a children's library, which for many years was the center of my world. I was fortunate that we had books at home. I've always known, when I'm asked, when did you know what you wanted to be or do? I've always known, and I'm only just realizing what a blessing that is, to know from the beginning that this is what you love. I wanted to write. I wanted to tell stories. It's always been my passion. So I have this memory from when I was, I'm going to say maybe in early secondary school. I'm in my mother's car and we're going to town. And we get past the campus gates and I look out of the window and I feel this profound sense of melancholy. And it's because I realize there's so many stories out here and I will not be able to tell them all. And so I always had this feeling of life being about storytelling and about collecting stories and about hearing stories, which also is why when I was growing up, I was such an eavesdropper. I listened to things that were not my business. My parents' friends will come. I would be sort of skulking around to hear what was being said. And I continue to be an eavesdropper, by the way. So I was actually hoping to hear some things here. But so I knew from a very early on what I wanted to do. And I read everything. Books gave me joy. I read the books that were for children, and I read the books that were not for children. I asked questions of everything. In some ways, I like to think of myself as, and I still think of myself as an eternal student. I'm always thinking about what I don't know and what I want to learn. And I started writing really early. I remember the stories I wrote for my mother when I was about 6, and she kept them. And so I would write stories that were exactly like the things I was reading. So for a long time, I was copying Enid Blyton. So instead of Famous 5, I would have maybe, Sweet 7. But they would, but they would live in but they wouldn't live in Nsukka. They would, there would be white people abroad because I was reading about white people. So I thought books had to have white people in them. And I like to tell this story because I think that it's so important that young people see themselves reflected in the stories that they read. And so for me as a mother now with a 7-year-old, it's so important for me that my daughter reads and is read to about people who are like her. And I just have to say there is, and I don't know if she's here, the lovely woman who wrote Toby Goes to the Conservatory, which is here she is. And that's one of my daughter's favorite books. My daughter has memorized it. And I'm so grateful to you because, it's one of the books that I feel like it's not a chore for her. Because, I get her these books. And so we had to go, by the way, because of your book, we had to go to the conservatory. And she's like, that's the koi. It's in the book, koi. So thank you for your work. So anyway, I think when I started discovering African books, I started to realize, your own story can be in literature. Your own story is worthy of literature. And I feel so strongly about this that it's one of the reasons that years later, when I had, sort of become somewhat successful, I wanted to do a writing workshop for Nigerians, also kind of a Pan-African workshop, because I wanted to show to young writers coming up that our stories are worthy of literature. That we don't have to, so in those stories that I was writing early on, I'd never seen snow at the time, but I was writing about children playing in the snow. And when you sit back and think about it now, it's incredible. I had characters who were eating apples. This is early 1980s in Nsukka. There were no apples. There were mangoes and cashews. The first time I was published, I was 15 years old, and I'd written some poems, which now I think about it were really terrible. But I thought that I was a happening somebody. So I wrote the poems, and I had my poor mother's secretary type them. And I actually mean to go find that man, Mr. John, because he was wonderful. He had so much patience and time for me. I would give him lots of papers to type, and he very happily would type them and bring them for me. So he typed 3 of my poems. And at the time, one of the magazines that often would be in the house was Prime People. I don't know how, remember Prime People? And, Prime People was not in any way literary at all. But it was kind of the only Nigerian magazine that I saw in the house. So I sort of copied the address of Prime People, and then I folded the poems, put it in an envelope, and sent it off to Prime People with a letter that said, very self-importantly, I am 15 years old. I enclosed, please find 3 of my wonderful poems. So I think, and God bless the editor of that Prime People, because you know what? 2 weeks later, my poems were in Prime People. And I think it was really that the editor must have said, who is this small girl with this kind of audacity, So I'm sure at the time for him, it wasn't it wasn't about whether the poems were good or not. I think it was just a response to this kind of audacity of trying, yes. And really my whole life, I've always believed in trying. I really believe in trying. I think the worst that can happen is it won't work out. but then you would have tried. And so it's kind of been how I've looked at my writing, my work, my career since then. So after the poems were published, my mother took it around to show everyone on campus. And I think the next thing then was I was writing a play about the Biafran War. So my grandfathers both died in refugee camps in Biafra. And growing up for me was always to know that there was a shadow, in our history. So my father would talk about his father endlessly. But always, always, there was a particular kind of pain in his voice. And it wasn't just because he had lost his father, it was because of how he had lost his father. His father died in a refugee camp. My father could not go because the roads were occupied by Nigerian soldiers. And at the end of the war, when my father finally went to see where his father was buried, nobody knew because lots of people had died in the refugee camp and really it was sort of mass graves. And so my father said, "Can you just point me to where?" And he said, the man there just said, "Around there." And my father says he then went and took a handful of sand and he kept that sand. And my father was not a person who was giving to sort of drama like I am. If I were to tell that story, it would be very dramatic, but my father told it very calmly. And in some ways, the calmness of the telling made it even more haunting. And I think that's the reason I've been obsessed with that period in our history. I wanted to understand it for myself, but also I think I wanted to tell the story for my generation of Nigerians, because I feel that one of the problems with our education system is that it does not make us familiar with our own history. And so I actually started really early on reading everything I could about Biafra. So I wrote, oh, that's very kind, thank you. So I wrote this play, which I hope none of you will ever read, so I won't even tell you what it's called. I wrote it when I was 17. I interviewed my father endlessly. I talked to his friends. When I look back now, I think it would be fair to say that I was in some ways an annoying child. But I mean in a good way, right? So I was the one, "Uncle, where were you in May of 1967? Auntie, so when Nsukka fell, where were you? Did you eat that morning? What did you eat?" But that, I think, is what one does when one writes fiction. You have to, really, in some ways, it's the accumulation of detail that makes a story work. And so to do that, I needed to be that annoying little girl questioning her uncles and aunties. So I wrote this play, and I sent it off to Spectrum Publishers in Ibadan. And I was shocked that they actually accepted to publish it. So God bless Spectrum. And so it gave me a lot of confidence. It made me think that I always really believed that I would write. I dreamed and I hoped that I would be read. And so being published by Spectrum kind of gave me, made me think, yes, maybe this thing you're doing is not such a waste of time. And then, so while all of this is happening, I'm also in secondary school. I'm doing well in school, and everybody tells me you have to be a doctor. And I just want to say, please, for all the parents here, do not do that to your children. Don't force them to become doctors. There's so many other things they can be and do. I mean, I think that I really think that medicine is something that one should study only when one really wants to, because in some ways it's a vocation. I find it to be quite a vocation, and I did not want to be a doctor. All I wanted to do was to be a writer. But and it wasn't even so much that I had intense pressure from home, but it was just assumed. I remember after I took the JSS, the junior secondary exam, and I made the best result in the history of the school, and I was seriously feeling myself. And then the teachers were like, "Oh, Adichie has to be in the science major class because she's going to be a doctor." And at the time, I'm like, nobody asked me, right? But I kind of went along with it because, as one does, I suppose. But also I was thinking, okay, I'll be a doctor, but really I'm still going to find a way to write. So I took JAM, got into medicine. 1 year into medicine, I was thinking, this is just not working. I was writing poems during class. My lectures were so boring. I mean, I did well, I passed, I got A's, but I was so bored. I had no interest in what I was studying. And, at some point I realized I cannot do this. And again, I think back to that theme of trying. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try. I have two choices. I can stay on and become a doctor and be unhappy, or I can try and change the course of my life. And of course, that meant leaving medicine, which, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, nobody does that. If you're going to leave medicine, you fail out of medicine. You don't get up and... So I remember the day that I told my parents that I wanted to leave. I mean, weeks had passed in which I was, my stomach was tight with apprehension. I was like, how am I going to tell daddy and mommy that I don't want to do this anymore? And I will never forget they were eating at the dining table, and I sort of came and stood behind them. And usually I would come stand behind them and sort of play with my father's hair, which was fun. But this time I stood there and I didn't play with his hair. So they sort of turned and they were like, Ogini, what is it? And I said, Achorozumi go medicine. I don't want to study medicine anymore. And was this silence that fell and enclosed all of us. And my heart was beating. And they were quiet for a while. And then, wait, who even said it first? Almost at the same time, it was, are you sure? And I said, yes. And they said, okay. I'm so, so grateful to my parents. Because I think that had they said no, I would not have left medicine, of course. And I think that the trajectory of my life would have been very, very different. And I think they trusted me to, they knew that I was a hard worker. They knew that if I was saying I wanted to do this major thing, then I had to sort of have a sense of what I wanted to do instead, which was then the next question, okay, you don't want medicine now, what do you want? And I said, I don't want to study sciences anymore because I was just so sick of physics and chemistry and biology. But at the time, and I think that still happens, our university system isn't flexible. And so leaving medicine, you can't leave medicine and suddenly say, oh, I want to go study history, right? Because you've not been prepared for it. But most of all, I said to them, I want to go to America. I want to try and go to America. Because when you're being raised by a professor father and a university administrator mother, and you know that American colleges cost $40,000, you do not go and tell them, I want to go to America. You tell them, I want to try and get myself to America, and there's a difference. And, but at the time, I was fortunate that my elder sister, was already in the US. So my father got his PhD in the US in the 1960s, and so both my sisters were born in the US, so they were both US citizens, so it was sort of easy for my sister to go to the US. And so I told my parents I want to take the SATs and I want to try and get a scholarship. And they said, okay. And so I then set out to do my own sort of self-directed preparation for the SATs, which was such a different thing from what I was used to. But I was like, I'm going to do this. So I got the books, studied and studied and studied, took the SATs, got a really good score, got a scholarship. And I remember when I got, I was using my sister's address in the US for school. So each time my sister called, my heart would be beating because I was like, is there news? Is there news? And I'd applied to a number of schools. So she would call and say, okay, there's an acceptance. But this one, they're not giving you full scholarship. They're giving you 25,000 out of 30. And as she's saying that, what I'm thinking is, you're kidding me. Like, this is actually happening, right? And then finally, we got an acceptance from a school that was giving me a full ride, and I was like, okay. So I went to America. And going to America, I think, for me, was not just escaping medicine, which it really was primarily, but also I wanted to learn things. I felt that I had been constrained in a system that was so focused on the sciences. I wanted to learn, history and archaeology, and I wanted to, know the basics of music. I wanted to learn philosophy. I just wanted to learn. And I loved the American liberal arts system that just allowed me to take classes in everything. And I think that also aided my writing. But what I did not want to study was literature, because I felt that literature that it can constrain your creativity, that you take classes in literature and you start to think of books in terms of what is the theme, rather than books as sources of joy, pleasure. And so the one thing I avoided when I was taking classes was literature. Because also I was a lover of books. I didn't want anybody to spoil for me my love of books. And so when I got to the US, I was writing, and I was thinking I really want to try and get published properly. So I would go to the library. This was kind of before the internet. So this is sort of 1997. I mean, the internet existed, but it wasn't the thing that it is now. And so I would go to the library, get books about how to get published, read everything. And so I started sending things out. So the thing was, you were advised to write short stories because, in general, agents wanted to see a snippet of what you could do before they would decide whether to take you on. And so I wrote short stories, sent them out. I think I was so sure that my stories were very good. So I was thinking, of course, the first acceptance will come in like 1 week. So I start sending things out. And when you would send it out, you would include an envelope addressed to yourself, stamped, so that they could send back their response. And so each time I would go to the mailbox and see my own handwriting on an envelope, I would know that it was from someone to whom I had sent my writing. And my heart would be beating. So the first one that came, I kind of was, I was like, yeah, the acceptance has come. So I open it. And it's not just a rejection. It's that this person, this really unkind person, had just scrawled N-O on my manuscript and sent it back. I'm still going to find that person. But, and I was really devastated by that because I really had just thought that it would be easy. And so then followed many, many more rejections, many of them kinder than that first one, but still rejections. But I kept sending out things. So things would be rejected, I would revise them, I would send them out. And that's also when I started to learn that sometimes when you get a rejection, it's not, it can be that the person who rejected you is wicked. It can also be that you haven't done your best and that the story is not good enough. And I learned that because actually when I look back, I'm really happy that those early things were rejected because they weren't good enough. I had done them hastily. I had done them not with a kind of integrity of purpose. I had done them thinking, this is what I can do to be published here. But really, the story that I wanted to write, I was homesick at the time. I was living in Connecticut, and the winters were unbearable. And so I already had the story in my head that was sort of this kind of sort of nostalgic take on Nsukka, where I grew up, a story about the things that I was interested in, religion, what colonialism did with religion, all of those things. But I was writing stories that I thought were hip and sending them off, and they were being rejected. And so finally I said to myself, just write what you really want to write. Write the thing that is true to you. And, and try. Again, you can only try. So I started writing my novel, Purple Hibiscus. And I remember when I finished, just feeling that I had done what my spirit was at peace with. And so I started sending it out, more rejections. But this time, it was different because the rejections were actually often quite nice. I love your writing, but I don't know what to do with you because it's set in Africa, and you've also thrown in some African words. There were people who said, if you consider taking out the African words, then I will consider taking you on. To which I said, no, thank you. There was somebody who said to me, there is nobody like you. So and this is the thing that, for me, about being published at the time was, I wasn't like anyone. And the publishing industry is very much about, this is the new so-and-so. So they said to me, and one of the agents said to me, if you were an Indian, it would have been easy for me to sell your book because then I could say you're the next Arundhati Roy. At the time, Arundhati Roy was this Indian writer who was doing very well and was well known. But this agent said, but you're not Indian. I remember at some point thinking, how can I be Indian? How can I be Indian? But he said, you're not Indian, so I don't know how to sell you because there's no African. The African we know is Chinua Achebe, and he wrote years and years ago. So we do not know a contemporary African. You're not like anybody. And it was demoralizing to hear, but I kept trying. And I remember at the time thinking, I'm not going to change my book. I'm not going to. This is the book I want to write. And finally, after, honestly, I'm sure like 20 rejections, if not more, this agent wrote to me. She was just starting out, so she was new. And she said to me, I am willing to take the risk of taking you on. So I was like, okay, thank you. I was very excited, actually. And then, so usually the process is the agent is the person who then sells your book to a publisher. And so she said to me, I want you to write a list of your top 3 dream publishers. And she said, we're probably not going to get them because you're unknown, you're African, you're writing about Africa, you refuse to take out the African words, but just write your top 3. So I did. Because I had done so much research on publishing, I knew the sort of top 3 literary publishers. And I sent her the list, and she said, okay, I'm going to send these first, and then we'll see. And so she sounded so certain that they would say no, that I became certain that they would say no. And 2 weeks in, I will never forget, I was in London staying with my brother at the time, and this agent calls me from Washington, D.C., and she says, Algonquin said yes. Algonquin was the publisher I wanted. And she sounded so shocked herself. And I just will never forget the sense of just joy and gratitude that I felt. I remember thinking my story is going to go out into the world. And but again, she was very careful about sort of having me manage my expectations. She said, Algonquin is very literary. They're actually quite a small publisher, and they were. And she said, and you're really not going to be on top of their list. You're going to be on the bottom because, again, you're a debut novelist who's unknown and you're not like anybody, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm fine. I remember at the time thinking, if 2 people buy this book, I will be happy. Right? And maybe one of them would have to be my sister. So to be one person buying the book. And then the book came out, and it became an independent bestseller. And it became an independent bestseller because, so Algonquin did very little publicity because they were a small house. They really didn't have a lot of sort of money for marketing. So it turned out that what happened was that booksellers were hand selling it. So you would walk into a bookstore, and the book people in the bookstore who had read it would say to whoever came in, you need to read this. And for me, that was just the loveliest thing to hear, because it made me feel that there was something organic about the book doing well, that it wasn't because it had been pushed into that really very little marketing was done. And so that gave me a lot of confidence, gave me a lot of joy. And I think this is maybe the thing that when people ask me, when do you think that your career kind of became something that you knew would probably continue, is when Purple Hibiscus was shortlisted for the Orange Prize in the UK. The Orange Prize is this prize for women's writing. And I was in the shortlist with really great established writers. And when I was told I was shortlisted, I was like, what? And I think that's when I sort of got to, that's how I got on the map, right? Is that how it's said? Yeah. It was being shortlisted for the Orange Prize. And then lots of things followed. I remember the Orange Prize organizers saying, we have great names on this list, but all the journalists are asking about the young African writer. And I was like, young African writer. Part of me rolled my eyes. I was like, Nigerian, thank you very much. But, and so really, I think, so I think after that, started to feel this sense that, that I could continue trying. And it's been, Purple Hibiscus was published in 2003. So it's been, good Lord, this is the reason I did not like maths. 19 years, yeah. So it's been 19 years, and I'm still trying. I'm still trying. And So before we sort of go to questions, I just want to end by saying that sometimes when we talk about, dreaming and hoping and what we want to do with our lives, I think there's a kind of easy, well-meaning, motivational approach, which is always believe you can do it. And I think there is truth to that. I do think that one has to have faith and believe in something. But I also think that we need to make room for self-doubt, because sometimes when you have self-doubt, and you've been hearing you have to believe all the time, it can sometimes make you think that having self-doubt means you've sort of failed yourself, and you haven't. I think self-doubt has to be part of the process, because we're human and we're fragile and so what I would say is it's so important to believe that one can do something. It's so important to try. It is so important to try. But also when self-doubt comes, it's part of, I think for me, it is so much part of the journey. 19 years after Purple Hibiscus was shortlisted, and so many things have happened in my life and in my writing that I'm so grateful for, I still have that balance between faith and self-doubt. And I've come to just take it as, this is how it is. This is the process. This is how it is. And you just keep trying. Thank you for listening.
Chimamanda. It took me 24 hours to learn to pronounce your name. I kept saying it overnight, Chimamanda. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you'd please permit us, we have a few questions from our audience, virtual and physical. So if you can be seated, maybe in the middle, that would be fine. Thank you. How was that speech for you? Wasn't that amazing? And to think that we started today's session talking about self-doubt and imposter syndrome, and now we're hearing about the audacity of trying and finding a fair balance between self-doubt and being able to try. Oh, wow, there's a queue. It's like we're queuing for fuel.
4-4. What do we have online?
Okay, we will take some from the virtual audience, but let's start with the physical audience. Please, short, sharp, sweet, straight to the point. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chimamanda. I'm so privileged to see you physically, and I'm so happy and excited.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Just like you, I have a background in sciences. I'm a pharmacist, but I write too. I ghostwrite for people, and I also write research papers and short stories. But my question is this. You have been organizing, creative writing workshops over the years. And I remember when I was preparing for this conference, I went online and I was trying to look up the Purple Hibiscus creative writing workshop. I think the last time it was held was 2019. So what I want to ask is it going to continue? Because I look forward to it. I want to be mentored by you. I don't know if it's possible personally or to belong to a group.
I'm sure that 1,500 or more women in this hall, 2,000 women in this hall want that too. So.
But you know what? I respect shooting your shot when you can. I respect that. I totally respect that. So we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do. But about the workshop, there's that gentleman there, so give him your information. But please only her, please only her. I love you all, but please only her.
Only one shot.
Please only her.
What does this remind you of? The audacity of trying.
Yes.
And the workshop will continue, but COVID just messed everything up, so that's why we stopped during COVID. But next year, early next year, will be the next workshop.
She's crying. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Noah
much.
James, thank you. All right, we'll take another question from this aisle.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Ifoma Wabeke. Chimamanda, I love you. And because I love you, I named my second daughter Chimamanda. Keep doing what you're doing. I listen to you on LinkedIn. with my husband. And we decided to pay for my daughter, my first daughter. We decided to pay for ballet classes for her because we discovered that she loves dancing. So please keep doing what you're doing. It's encouraging.
Thank you.
And I also want to ask, do you have plans on creative writing and all sorts for kids in Africa, especially in Nigeria and down to Port Harcourt? Thank you very much.
It's a beautiful question.
That's very specific, Port Harcourt. Thank you for. You know what? Not really, no, and I'll tell you why. It's because I think my vision is often too dark, so I'm worried about traumatizing children if I teach them. But I'm writing a children's book, so maybe after that, I don't know, maybe I will do something for children, I don't know. But I'm just writing this book because of my daughter, and so we'll see.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we cannot take all questions, but what we're going to do is have a few people read questions. Please read out your question. We're going to take all the questions at the same time and see how many we can get to answer. So let's take 2 from here. Let's take 2 from there. In the interest of justice and fairness, the lady on the black jacket, you asked in the first panel, so can I please ask that you give up your slot for someone else? Thank you very much. So please, go ahead.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Mariam. Thank you, Chimamanda. I have a 6-year-old daughter. She's a sickle cell warrior. And to ask, that was one of my questions. The second question is actually what you said, that your stories are quite dark, and that's the exact experience I have with her. I'm not the writer yet, she's the one. And a lot of her stories are from her pain. So when she wants to write about fun stuff, it's not as well articulated as the very sad ones. And I'm worried that it's beginning to affect how she expresses herself. She expresses herself super well when she's talking about her illness, but she's not so expressive when she's talking about her sad, her good part. So how can I help her to improve herself when she's writing about
Thank you very much. Well, that's a good question. Next.
Good morning. My name is Fumilola Asa. Thank you for sharing your story authentically. So I like when you talked about when you changed your path, in school because you saw that it wasn't working. But I find that sometimes when you're far down a path, it's always very difficult to take a pivot. Can you share any experiences where you really actually thought, I've gone too far down this part to change? And what advice would you give in that space? Because I find that very limiting for a lot of people.
All right, thank you very much. One from this line.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nneka Chimamanda. I'm so happy to see you, and I'll be looking forward for these highlights. And my question is, please, do you have a platform where young writers, people that are not getting support from family, from friends, they have notes, but they are talented, they are gifted by God? Do you have a platform where they can share their stories, maybe do a book trailer, and be able to get support or stand a chance or opportunity of being published? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Ajamel Koje. Very happy to be here. Thank you for sharing your story. You have been writing for over 19 years, maybe more. I would like for you to share your writing process as it has evolved to what it is today. Very interested in seeing what I can learn because I write stories and I also love to write poems. Thank you. All right. Can I hear?
So, we apologize. In the interest of time, we may not be able to take other questions. We'll have her run through this. You will ask, and then we'll give her the opportunity to decide if she can answer, but we've run out of time. It's okay.
Can I just say there's a lovely looking auntie?
Yes.
Can she ask us?
All right, can I or her?
Her. I love you, but
That's fine. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Chimamanda, thank you so much. My name is Kaine Dosekun. I think you possibly know my daughter Simi. You've talked about the audacity, or at least somebody has mentioned about the audacity of trying. And I applaud you for the audacity of courage. Because quite frankly, I was in exactly the same situation as you in year 1 of medicine. And I knew it was the wrong place for me. But I didn't have the courage to quit. And because of that experience, I made sure that for my children, I have 2 daughters, that I was very particular about these 2 children, especially if you've got brilliant children, clever children, who are all-rounders. To make sure, and I'm saying this because there are a lot of young mothers here, study your children, understand your children. What are their strengths? What are their interests? And encourage those interests rather than the straight lines. Luckily now there are fewer straight lines. Well, I mean, there are still straight lines, but people want their children to be footballers, musicians, etc., etc. But in my time, the lines were very straight. Doctor, lawyer, engineer. But basically, just saying to the young mothers here, please make sure that you really are finding out what your children are interested in and encourage them along those lines, whatever those lines may be. Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you so much. This is where we draw the curtains on the physical questions. Please, I apologize. But
If I promise to keep the answers really short, I just feel bad about these 2 people
Okay.
standing. I promise I'll keep the answers really short.
all right, so straight to the point, please.
Good morning. My name is Titi Shodende. I'll be quick. Thank you for your story. Thank you for sharing with us. I have a son who I believe writes really well. I write, my husband writes, but I've told him you write much better than both of us. He's that child that the teacher would read his essays in class and say, this is what I want to see in your essays. He's almost finished a book, which he refuses to finish. My question is this. I've tried to encourage him to focus on his writing. He'll be going to university soon. He says, Mom, I'm a great counselor. I want to study psychology. And I feel that one day he may regret not having pursued this because he has such good talent. How would you encourage such a child? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you
Can I
very
please
much.
ask that each person asking a question limits their time to 30 seconds?
That's fine.
Thank you.
That's fine. So for audacity of trying, I was in your shoes. What I did was to fail jam twice. So thankfully, I'm not a medical doctor today. But right now, I am an Igbo language podcaster. And, and my question, of course, is simple. Can I walk straight to China and get a commitment from you to come to you and record a few episodes?
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
okay? Thank you.
Second shot. Take
I
your
love
shot.
it.
It's not a question. It's not a question. So, hi. Good morning, afternoon, everybody. So this is not a question, Chimamanda. My name is Jody, and I'm a lawyer and a natural hair enthusiast and a manufacturer as well. So what I love about you is how you have always carried that Afrocentric look on every international platform you've been on. How you've changed the narrative that you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a weave. We can look beautiful in our skin. It's the way I'm wearing my natural hair here. Like I rock my hair every day, and then I have products for you. That's why I want to talk to you.
Third shot.
These women do not play.
Third shot.
So how can I give you the products? Like I'll appreciate your that's all.
There are shots in the air.
Thank you, and your
In the
hair
hair.
is gorgeous.
Thank you
Your hair is
very much.
gorgeous.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay. Last
All right,
one.
the last question.
Hello, good morning,
Products ahead. Do
Dr.
you want me to bring them
Chimamanda.
to-
Let's listen, please. Let's listen, please. Let's listen, please.
Hello, good morning, Dr. Chimamanda. My name is Michelle Nkiruka Ukebu, and I'm a fan of your work. And I would like to ask, what's the source of your courage and determination? And secondly, you mentioned that self-doubt isn't necessarily a bad thing, and we should allow room for doubt in life. So how do you balance feelings of self-confidence and self-doubt? And how has self-doubt positively or negatively impacted your work and how have you learned from feelings of self-doubt? Thank you.
Thank you. The questions are...
We have a recap.
Oh, you're good. Because I was going to say the problem with being sleep deprived is I've actually forgotten half the question.
Okay, so I have them
The
written
recap.
down. We have the first question from a mother of a sickle cell warrior with dark stories.
Oh, I was going to say, let her be. I mean, she's writing dark stories because that's what she feels called to write. Let her be. I think also, can we maybe start to feel comfortable with darkness in this country? I mean, because life is light and dark. Life is not just like, we can't constantly try to pretend away the dark. And I think maybe that's also why there's so many young people today, when they're dealing with depression, they don't even have the language to talk about it because someone will tell them, just cheer up, right? I think darkness is part of life. And so if your daughter is writing dark stories, read them, right? And also, I think if you do want her to lighten up a bit, don't force it. I think sometimes talking to children is so important, just listening to them. Auntie said something which I really love, which she said, get to know your children. I really believe that. And thank you. And so I wouldn't say, here is what to do to make her stop writing dark stories. And can I also just tell you that a lot of great literature is dark? You know, do you know how Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart ends? That is dark, if there ever was dark. You know, everybody will tell you that Dostoevsky is one of the greatest writers of all time. He is so dark. Life has darkness, so yeah.
Thank you very much. The next question says, it's about basically how to navigate changing paths when you feel like you've gone too far.
Oh, yes. I think that's, I kind of understand that. Obviously, I don't think I've necessarily felt it because, again, I'm going to say that I don't think it's ever too late. I just do not believe that it's ever too late. And maybe also what's happened to me in the past 2 years is a kind of this incredible awareness of how short life is. Like, we don't know how much we have. We don't know how much time we have. And I really believe in trying. So this idea that it's too late, I don't think it's ever too late. You can still surprise yourself. And I know people, there's so many stories of people who started when they thought it was too late. I mean, my sister who went to the US, for example, she left because her marriage had failed here in Lagos. And she felt, you know, how can I start again? I just can't possibly. She's doing very, very well now in the US. It's never too late. I really believe that. And, you know, also think about, here's the other thing I like to think about is, what's the worst that can happen? So if it means that you are in this job in the bank and you're just dying of boredom and it's just tedious, and you want to start this thing where you're going to package very correct small chops and distribute it. And so my thing is, what's the worst that can happen? If you have the capital to start, I would say start. You just never know. Life is too damn short.
All right. We have another question. This one is talking about the platform for young writers to share their stories and stand the chance of
No,
being
I do
published.
not have that. So maybe if we can hook up and she can tell me how to do it.
And someone's asked you to share your writing process as well.
The writing process involves a lot of chocolate, a lot of... when the writing is not going well, I just get really unhappy. But when it's going well, I am transported. So I sit there and I don't realize that 5 hours have gone by because I'm just transported into this sort of magical space of writing fiction. But when I'm writing nonfiction, it's different. I'm very sort of almost clinical about what I'm doing because I know what I want to achieve with nonfiction. With fiction, it's just joyous magic. With nonfiction, it's, I want to get everybody in the world to be feminists, so how do I do it? So there's a difference, right? Yeah.
I want to believe that we've touched on the questions. We have our virtual community. Oh, the last one. I'm so sorry. That's the last lady. Yes, balancing self-doubt. We were talking about the audacity of trying. I think, okay, no, it's not the same.
And how has self-doubt affected me? You know, I like to say that I'm sure it must have, but I don't really know why, because I don't really know how. I think what I can say with honesty is that I experience self-doubt, but I push on despite self-doubt because I've come to make peace with the fact that it's part of it. It's never fun. I really, really do not like feeling that way. But, it comes, and you might as well just think of it as something that you have to deal with. I want to tell a really short story about, it's not so much about self-doubt as it is about, well, I suppose, yes, as it is about doing what you want to do. So some years ago here in Lagos, I did an event for my novel Americana, and this man at the back, when it's time for Q&A, this man stands up and he says, Chimamanda, I used to really love you when you were just writing just novels. But once you started talking about this feminism, I wasn't sure I liked you again. So what I want to ask you is, what do you plan to do so that I can start liking you again? So I'm sure you're not surprised by this. My people are fantastic. So I remember thinking, who asks this sort of thing? But at the same time, I respected his honesty, right? So I said, well, first of all, keep your like. Keep it, thank you, but keep it. And here's why. Because, I remember saying to myself, I made the choice, in addition to, obviously, my first love, my great love is literature. That's the thing that I think that I was called to do. But I got this platform because of my writing that made it possible for me to talk about the things that I care about. And I took that opportunity. I don't necessarily love it. When people say you're a feminist icon, I did not set out to be a feminist icon, but I am so wounded by the ways in which women have been excluded, diminished, oppressed, that I feel that I cannot help but talk about it. Because I feel that talking about it might make a difference somehow. And so that feeling that, if you're talking about it, you're risking the like or love of someone, I can live with that. And I think maybe that's a good way to think about, so I would say, and I think particularly for women, because I think that female socialization makes us think that we have to be liked. We don't have to be liked. It's very nice to be liked. It's very, very nice to be liked, right? I like being liked. I like it when I go into a restaurant and I want to go pay and they say, somebody has paid. I'm like, right? I love all of that. I love it when, I love that. I love it when I'm doing events and people I don't know are bringing flowers and things. I love that this lovely woman is giving me that free thing, right? However, I do not need to be liked. And one of the things I want to say to particularly young women, you don't have to be liked. Because the thing is, if you're changing yourself to be liked, that person doesn't like you. They just like this fake thing that you've created. And so, the reason I bring it up in terms of self-doubt is that sometimes I think we also don't act because we're worried of what somebody's going to say. Those people, if they are bad belly people, they will be bad belly people anyway, right? So you might as well do what you want to do.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. From the online audience, the delegates online, we have a question from Joy Amamchuku and also Gloria Idia, and I think they are similar questions. First one is, what if you have tried your very best and you are still rejected?
Okay.
And the second one is, what was the motivation factor that kept you going in the midst of all the rejection?
What if you've tried your best? I would say,
sorry.
Somebody from my village has sent someone. The person who says I've tried my hardest, I would say you haven't. No, honestly. I would say keep trying. But I don't think that trying necessarily means that it must end in success. I think, and this is why I keep saying, what's the worst that can happen? Right? If you have to really, really, really try. I think I would have kept sending out my things for maybe 10 more years. And then if nobody said yes, then maybe I would then say, all right, I better go back to medical school or something. So I think that the trying has to be extended, has to be concerted, has to involve homework. And by that I mean there's so many young people who, in my opinion, don't put in everything. There's a kind of, and I think it's something that's largely widespread in this society where we have come to accept mediocrity in so many things. And so young people will say they've tried their best, but have you really? Have you actually done the homework? Have you gone and studied every imaginable thing in that, whatever sphere you're trying in? Have you have you made yourself the best that you can do for yourself before you start trying? Because otherwise, you haven't really tried. So the reason that I memorized every bloody thing in that fact book about how to get published was because I wanted to do my homework. I wanted to know I have done my homework. I know how this process works. And so as I'm trying sort of in a way that I am being propelled by knowledge. And I think that's really important. So keep trying. Keep trying, to that person who said, and I also want to say something about courage. Thank you, Simi's mom, for that. I have never really, I don't think I wake up and tell myself I am courageous. I really don't. What I wake up and tell myself, and I've kind of always been that way, again encouraged by the loveliest parents in the world, is that I want to be who I am in the world. And by that I mean that I just refuse to pander. I refuse to, I want to be myself. I want to feel comfortable in my skin. I want to sleep well at night. And so it means that I want to say what I think. And again, I think when you've been loved, and as I've been, I'm like, I have enough friends, so I don't need to go pander to look for new friends. But I also want to say that the way that society responds to acts of trying, the way that we as people respond to the audacity of trying is also important. And so I would say, for example, that it's important for us not to try and squash people's dreams. It's important when your friend tells you, I'm really thinking about leaving this bank and doing something. It's important that the first thing you say not be, but that won't work now. I think it's really important. And not just in careers, also in life, because I think we cannot talk about careers without talking about our personal lives, right? Because both complement each other. And I think, for example, that in this society, if the woman has the courage, and often it takes courage, to leave a bad relationship, a bad marriage, an abusive relationship, what that woman deserves is respect and not judgment. And I think there's so much in this society that because women know the kind of judgment that's kind of waiting for them, they stay in terrible, terrible relationships that they should not be in. In some ways, it's similar to staying in a job that you know is wrong for you, but you're thinking it's too late, what will I do instead? There's so many women who are in marriages like that, and I think it's difficult enough without knowing that your fellow women are going to be the most judgmental about your decision. So if we can all just collectively say that we won't do it. I think a woman who shows courage deserves applause, deserves support, deserves understanding, deserves kindness, I think, instead of judgment. And also, finally, can we just start? I find that with many young women here in this country, there's this obsession with, is she married? When is she getting married? Who is she married to? I think it is disastrous for us to have this kind of obsession, which, it makes young women, it puts young women under so much pressure. So for the big aunties, just please don't do it to young women. I mean, they too want to be happy. They actually want to be happy. So if they're not yet married, maybe they just haven't found the right guy because they want to be happy. Right? And what did she say? No, but it's true though, right? Young women, they want to be happy. So it's not as if being single is because they want to be happy, but they just haven't, found the right person. And then you have all your aunties and so much pressure. I've talked to enough young women to know that this is just really disastrous, not just for the individual young women, but for the participation of women in society. Because if you're sort of weighed down by judgment and pressure and depression, you're not going to go and conquer the world. And we want women to conquer the world.
With this not so few words of hers, we hope we've been able to convince and not confuse you that you can rule the world. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please give a resounding applause for Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie Nwa James, now Nwa Grace. Thank you so much for your time. We have gifts for you. And right after this, we have the founders joining us.